about to bust the biggest misconception in the makeup industry, and that is that there are colors that you can't wear. I'm gonna demonstrate two really important fundamentals of color theory today that are going to open up the world of color to you. It's also going to be a video that comes out kind of as a companion. There are going to be two videos today, and the other one is the fastest, easiest, most foolproof way to find your best red lip. There are all of these diagnostics out there, and I'm telling you, this is the one that works. So you can skip over to that and come back here. You can watch this one and go there afterwards. The order doesn't matter, but today, I'm going to be breaking down these two fundamentals that I feel like are kind of misunderstood, but once you get the hang of them, again, you're going to be able to make any color work for you. So let's go ahead and jump in. So starting with saturation, what is saturation? Saturation is the difference between a pure color and the amount of white or black or gray that's been added to it. So if it has more white or black or gray, the combination of white and black, it's going to be less saturated or desaturated, as we say. And the more vivid and bright neon a color is, that's going to be the most saturated. That's different from pigmentation. A lot of times we equate pigmentation with saturation, and they're not the same thing. Pigmentation just has to do with the amount of pigment put in a formula. So pigmentation is a word that we sort of started using in early BeauTube because when we were swatching Morphe palettes, we were like, oh, it's impressive how much color payoff I get from this color because we equated that with quality. We've moved past that in a lot of ways, but that's sort of where that word originated. We're not going to be talking about pigmentation today because I feel like it conflates opacity and saturation. And opacity is super easy to understand. It is truly just how much you can see through it. If something's really opaque, you can't see through it. If something is super translucent, not opaque, then you can see through it. So you can turn something less opaque by diluting it, essentially, like you would with watercolor. Add more water, it becomes less opaque, more translucent. And when you apply that philosophy to makeup, we're talking about the difference between something having coverage or full coverage and then something being completely translucent like a gel color or a primer. Like a clear primer. So the demonstration is going to be kind of interesting today because I don't like to demonstrate good versus bad, right versus wrong. I try to demonstrate the ways that we can use these fundamentals of art math to make sense of the makeup that we're trying to achieve on our faces. Sometimes it's to diagnose why something's not working. Sometimes it's to be able to like feel more empowered playing outside of our comfort zone. So I'm going to be working in polar ways, one side of my face to the other, but that doesn't mean that one side is going to be entirely full saturation and the other one's going to be totally desaturated, or that I'm going to be working in full opacity on one side and total translucence on the other. I'm going to show you how to use both together to try and achieve something that might be a difficult color for me to wear, and that is, I'm gonna do blue eyeshadow, y'all. And regardless, it's probably gonna end up looking a little bit clowny by the end because I am going to use color to exaggerate the visibility of these two philosophies, you know, so that you can really see the differences, but understand that like that's just for visual demonstration purposes and that there's a whole spectrum of these things that you can use to make looks work for you. So I'm gonna start with some skin prep. I really like the Boom Boom Milk from Violette. It hydrates my skin, it's not super emollient, and it looks nice. And on my lips, I can't stop with the Eat 'em lip balms, y'all. They're so excellent, and the Butter Mochi is the clear one. And it is so nourishing. It makes great lip prep. So starting with Complexion, and this is kind of fun because it's gonna get your brain juices flowing. There is a saturation and an opacity to your skin tone, okay? And figuring that out for yourself is the first step towards making makeup work better for you. I have a desaturated skin tone. It means that if you were to mix the color of my skin on a palette, you would add a lot of white. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that fair people are always desaturated. You can have very desaturated deep skin that just has a lot of black pigment in it. It's worth mentioning and clarifying that when I say adding white or black, we're always talking about gray, but gray isn't a real color. It's just a combination of white and black. So to say that desaturating something is to add gray, really what it is we are adding less of a color. You can do that by mixing it with its opposite color, which also creates gray or mud. But when we're talking about makeup and actually mixing makeup to make something less saturated, we are talking about some proportion of black and white. Gray just isn't a real defined color. That's why I talk about it that way. A lot of times what we see when brands are developing their foundation shade range is that they will add more pure pigment to the deeper shades as it gets deeper on the scale. And they think that way because they think that they don't want something to go ashy on the skin, and so they're going to add more pure pigment. And that's not always the answer, because you can desaturate something with black pigment as well. So I am desaturated with white pigment. Some people can be desaturated with black pigment or gray pigment, anywhere in between. And then there are people on both sides of the scale who can have more saturated versions of their skin. So you could have a more saturated blue undertone or more saturated pink undertone and be anywhere on the scale of skin tones. Now, opacity, ooh, this one is so helpful because look at my skin. You can see my veins in so many places. My lips are like virtually transparent. All you're seeing is blue because it's like the veins underneath my skin. Understanding that is gonna really help you use opacity to your advantage, because that doesn't always mean that you're using the wrong color. It might just mean that you need to bump up the opacity in order for the color to show up truer on your skin, because you might be like me and have really translucent skin. That is something that tends to translate on the scale with melanation. So melanation, richer, deeper skin is going to be less translucent because of the nature of melanin, but I don't want to speak in like absolute terms because I don't know. I don't know if there are people with very deep skin tones who you can still see, you know, their veins through their skin or something like that. I don't want to paint with that broad of a brush, as it were, but it does tend to correlate. Okay, let's put some freaking makeup on my face, okay? I'm gonna start on this side with the most translucent foundation that I have, right? And that is this new, I mean, I don't have the Becca Clear foundation anymore, and that would be a pretty silly demonstration, but this is the new Charlotte Tilbury foundation, and I actually really like it. It is the Hollywood Flawless filter in a stick, but I don't like using the Hollywood Flawless filter very much. I don't like kind of spreading liquid with my fingers very much. This is so much tidier. It's just such an easier way for me to think about using this product. And then we can use a concealer on top, and that's going to take down the shine and give us a little bit more opacity where we need it. Now, when we're talking about our complexion and the options that you have, you want to play in the realm of opacity. You don't want to play in the realm of saturation, because saturation really determines the tone of something. And so if you have the wrong saturation value on your foundation's not going to match your face. When we get into the color cosmetics portion of this, we'll talk about how you can use both. But when we're talking about your complexion, ideally, you want your foundation to match your skin. Maybe you don't. I do, and it's always good to know where you're starting from. And on this side, we're gonna go with something that is not, you know, full coverage. I don't really own anything that's full coverage, but I wanna show y'all more coverage. So this is the Prada foundation. I don't wanna dip too much into the other videos that I've talked about with art math, color theory, because I don't want it to get too confusing, but this also has a little bit more of a matte finish to it, and that is going to look more opaque to the eye because it absorbs light. I think that's a pretty good visual of opacity. This is more opaque, harder to see through. This is very translucent, and you can see all my freckles through it, and that's going to be important later on, so put a pin in that. A lot of times when I talk about other fundamentals of color theory as they pertain to makeup, I encourage you, especially if you want to stay within a comfort zone, or if this is new to you and you're just kind of playing with it, to match it. Make it agree across your whole face. This is the exception, because what I'm trying to do is enable you and empower you to use different colors, maybe things that are outside of your comfort zone, but to know how to balance them on your face. Because you'll know, you're looking at something and you're like, this doesn't really work. And I guess it's because I can't wear blue eyeshadow. But what it really is that you just don't have the tools yet to know what to push and what to pull to balance it out and make it look good to your eye. And there is no objective good or bad. You can wear whatever colors you freaking want, y'all. Especially because opacity, when you're wearing a color that doesn't necessarily agree with your coloring, like I don't look particularly blue, you know, so blue is not gonna be my color usually. The best way to get that to agree with my complexion is to let it be as opaque as possible, because if it is translucent, it's going to go green because it's blue, it's translucent, my skin is kind of yellow, and it's not going to look true blue, as it were. So that was the Givenchy Prism Libre Concealer. It's pretty chill in terms of coverage, but I do still want a little more opacity in my concealer, like I said, because I don't want to be a Tin Man all over. So I'm going with the Hourglass on the other side. This is a high coverage concealer and it's gonna add a lot of opacity. And opacity translates, like I said, to coverage. So you can still see my blemishes over here, you can still see my freckles and stuff. And like I said, one is not good or bad, it's just about preference. And it can be preference day to day. It doesn't have to be your all the time committed preference. One is not for you and one is not for you. Okay, opacity, less opacity, and they both look good because they match my skin. So again, we're matching my saturation value with my foundation, okay? And we are playing with the variable of opacity. I want to show y'all a couple of foundations that don't match me, that are the right level, but they are not the right saturation. So when I say level, they're the right lightness. So I have here the Makeup Forever HD Skin Hydra Glow, and this is in the shade 1Y06. It's a very difficult shade range to get matched in. I haven't seen anybody have a ton of success with it or immediate success. Even if they find their shade, it's like they did it wrong 3 times by accident, just like doing their absolute best, but still it just takes a lot to get shade matched. And then this is the new Fenty Skin Tint, and you can see they're the right level for me, and they might even be the right undertone for me, but they're too saturated. There's too much pure pigment in there and not enough white, not enough gray for it to go with my desaturation value of my skin. That doesn't make them wrong. It just makes them wrong for me. I have all of the Makeup by Mario bronzers. This one's seen better days, but these are both in the shade Light. This happens to be the Soft Sculpt Transforming Skin Enhancer, which is a gel opacity product, right? So translucent, so translucent. In fact, a lot of people complain about it being translucent. And then we have the powder bronzer, right? And that is gonna be so much more opaque, meaning, you know, it's harder to see through. It's gonna build coverage when I put it on. So we're gonna go on either side with that. I'm gonna, again, since this is sort of complexion, I still think of bronzer as complexion product. I'm going to still go more opaque and like match the level of opacity on this side, and vice versa with the skin enhancer. We're not necessarily pushing the poles right now. Here is our bronzer, and you could powder first too. This has a pretty good dry down on its own, the Prada, so I'm not too worried about it, but I still will add some more powder to finish out the opacity. Vocal fry, opacity. Not too much. I'm not trying to, again, demonstrate how to do it wrong. All right, we have something. I'm gonna do this actually with a sponge. The same amount of product, but just a different appearance because you can see through the product. And it's the same color. He does a good job of making each formula pretty much the same color, formula to formula. Light is light in all of them kind of thing, or fair is fair. So what you're getting right now, of course, is this looks more natural and this looks more snatched. I think we're all pretty familiar with that phenomenon, but it's good to put a name to it, and the name is opacity. I'm also going to go in with a powder that is opaque. Okay, this is the Kosas powder. It comes in shades. I mean, there are still translucent powders that come in shades because powders in and of themselves are not absolutely transparent, but usually when there's like 10 shades in a powder, that's how you know that it is an opaque powder that's gonna add a little bit of coverage because you wouldn't want it to disagree with your skin tone. And then I have my trusty Laura Mercier, which is, I mean, virtually invisible, especially on my skin. It does come in 3 shades, and that is, again, because there's no such thing as an entirely unpigmented powder, but it does the best job that I have found of being almost entirely undetectable and translucent on the skin while still changing the texture and setting what's under it. Now we're going to move into talking more about saturation, because if I start mixing together opacity and saturation, the visual demonstration is just gonna get kind of muddied in your head. When we're talking about color cosmetics, the place where you can really play and make a color work for you is saturation. You have as much choice as you want out there in terms of opacity. You know, opacity can be achieved with color cosmetics just by applying more. And powders are going to have more opacity than creams. I don't need to demonstrate that with every single step to drive the point home. So I'm not going to be using coral blush today because we're going to be doing blue on my eyes. We're going to try and keep it pretty tame on my cheeks, but this is the most fleshed out, as it were, color family in my blush collection, so I figured it would be a good visual aid to examine the difference between opacity and saturation. So here we have Joy and Virtue from the Rare Beauty Soft Pinch Liquid Blushes. Joy is the same amount of actual non-white or black color in each of these, but Virtue is so much less saturated because it has had so much gray added to it, and that makes it easier for me to wear. This is the Armani Luminous Silk Liquid Blush in, I don't know, whatever the pinky coral color is. I'll put it on the screen because it's not on the bottle. Either way, I wanted to use this to demonstrate that something can still be vivid, but desaturated because there's been so much white added to it. It is not this gray version. So this is still desaturated, but because it's only white that's been added to it, we end up with a pastel instead of a muted tone, which is what I would call this. Now this is actually the Lisa Eldridge, the new lip balm in Meet Cute. Very similar to Virtue, but since it's a lip balm, the opacity is really low. It's super translucent. That's the difference. I think that we're gonna go ahead and cut to the chase on the eyes, and then we'll solve for the rest of my face after that, but this is going to be the best, quickest, easiest, most obvious demonstration of saturation because I have products that I can actually mix together. So today I'm gonna be using the About Face Matte Fluid Eye Paints, and I'm gonna use this pure blue shade over on this side, and I'm just gonna mix white with it on this side so that you can see what exactly happens when you dilute something with white and it goes less saturated. Blue, 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 blue. This is a very, very pure version of like a royal blue. My preference for blending something like this is a flat blender brush. It kind of works more like a paintbrush. It's easier to control. And this is the BK 206. And it's interesting because we're actually having a little bit of trouble achieving true opacity because there isn't really much white or black in this. We will clean all that up. I just want to let it dry with as much blue on there as possible. Now, I'm gonna take that same color, like I said, I'm gonna do just like a smidge. That is a metric smidge. And then I'm gonna take white and I'm gonna use a lot of it. Don't ever try, actually, when you're mixing a paint color to dilute something with white because white's not very powerful. And so you always want to start with a white base and then mix in a little tiny bit of your color at a time instead of the other way around, because white will never be able to kind of overpower a pure pigment on its own. You'll end up with way too much of the color that you're trying to mix. So that is a desaturated version of that blue, purely because all I did was add white. And as much as I didn't want to mix them together, well, I mixed those together. I mean, mix the fundamentals together. It's much easier to achieve opacity with them because it's been desaturated with white. It makes it so much more opaque on the skin. You can also see that because it's lower contrast against my skin, it's easier for me to wear. It's almost impossible to completely separate all of these phenomena from each other, right? It's so pretty. That's so pretty. I love that. So perhaps what I should do, actually, break the rules a little bit, but it's because I need this to work. Just as I was saying, don't try and dilute something with white in order to try and get a lighter version of it. Start with a white base and add the color. I'm gonna add an almost imperceptible amount of white that will blend directly into this blue, and it's gonna make it more opaque just so that it will stop skipping. It's just gonna give it more presence. Do you see? It's the same color. It's just not translucent. So, see? Instantly we get more payoff. This is one of, and I'm gonna do a whole video on this, but it's one of the biggest mistakes that I feel like a lot of brands are making in formulating their colors is that they think that in order for something to work really well on every skin tone, they need to make it translucent. It actually makes it harder to work with. Pretty easy to see the reason that I started with the eyes, and that is because this is the part that's gonna need the most cleanup. So the first thing that I wanna do actually is take a little pencil brush, and I'm gonna go in with the white right in the inner corner because I think it's cute. And I want it to just blend in a way that looks intentional. And then I'm gonna use the Alexandra Anelli method of surrounding a cool tone with a warm tone in order to ease that transition. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and throw on brows and mascara and eyeliner so that we can move on to the rest of the face and understand exactly what we're working with here instead of this kind of like half done eye look. So I used the same color of mascara and eyeliner on both sides, and I just did a pigmented brow product over here and a clear brow product over here. I went with a cool toned brown eyeliner, Tiramisu from Sephora collection, and my typical Thrive Cosmetics in Crystal, which is their black brown, because I wanted to just control for certain parts of this. Like, not everything needs to be a variable in this demonstration. Let's talk about blush, because blush is gonna make this look pretty wild if we go too hard on this side. If I wanted to demonstrate full saturation on this side and desaturation on this side, it's just gonna look clownish. And since we went with desaturation on this eye, I feel like we can get away with a little bit more saturation on the cheek and flip-flop them. So the issue here is that anything that's kind of nude, brown beige, it's gonna be desaturated because it's gonna be something that looks good on my skin, and I don't have a lot of really saturated blushes because I have a desaturated skin tone, and so those are hard for me to wear. So it would have to be something where I have like the entire line. In this case, we're gonna go this direction. I know. But these are both the Kosas Blush is Life, Football is Life blushes, and one is just so much more saturated than the other. This is Butterflies and this is Euphoria. They're both a cool toned pink, okay? That almost goes lilac, but one is so much more saturated than the other, and it doesn't necessarily mean more pigmented, it just means more saturated in its color, and we're gonna flip-flop them. I'm gonna put the less saturated version on this side and the more saturated version on this side because of taste level. I just want it to look a little bit more tasteful if at all possible. So we're gonna start with the lighter shade here, which again is Euphoria. And you can see, I don't want everything to be the focal point of this look, and so I'm letting that blue eye, but is it perfect? No, but that has nothing to do with the demonstration. I'm just not that good at it, okay? That's why I don't teach a lot of like, this is exactly how to do makeup kind of tutorials, is because I don't know. I'm not that good at it. I'm good at color theory. So anyway, look at that. Look at that. It's not stealing the show. It's letting the blue be the star. Now this blue is so pastel that I think that we can get away with the more saturated shade. This is Butterflies, very comparable to something like, so pretty, something like Dior Backstage Rosy Glow 001 Pink, or even the lilac shade. I did an entire video where I swatched all of these against every shade that compared to them in my collection. So I'm not gonna go too deep down that road because we've already done it. But you can see how I can allow those to kind of play in harmony a little bit more because the eye isn't quite as overwhelming in its saturation. However, yes, anybody who's watching this is going, but Kackie, contrast, contrast. Exactly. So what you're seeing here is that that shade contrasts against my skin a little bit too hard. So what do? Sorry, we're hearkening back to the original video. If you haven't watched my contrast video, I will link it below, but we have to fill this color because what we're seeing is translucence here, okay? Lack of opacity. So you're seeing my freckles, you're seeing my natural skin tone through there. And because of that, you are seeing that this color is not native to my skin. It just looks kind of like it's floating there. And so just like when you're dyeing blonde hair, bleach blonde hair back brown, you have to fill in the midtones or it's going to look hollow. So this looks kind of hollow right now. So I'm going to take Euphoria, which we used on this side, and fill in that hollowness because it's gonna give us the opacity to make even the more saturated version, which is Butterflies, look a little bit more like it grew there. See, I'm liking this side better right now because I feel like when we're talking about these vivid colors, it is easier to wear them when there is less distraction on the rest of your face, and increasing the opacity is a really easy way to decrease the distraction to the eye, whereas you can see so much more of my freckles and things like that, which are a little bit distracting. All that's left here is lips, because I'm not going to, you know, go into like saturated highlighter and stuff like that. Like that's not necessary, or like saturated contour. Wear the contour that works for you, okay? My lips feel fantastic. Lip products are amazing for demonstrating both saturation and opacity. In this case, I am going to talk about opacity because it is not always about the color itself not working on you. It might be that you're seeing too much of your lips through it, or that it's not matching the saturation value of your skin, which I refer you to the how to find your ideal red lip video that's going to come out at the same time as this. And honestly, it's not just about red. It'll help you find any best version of your lip color. So I'm going to go with Mob Beauty Lip Balm in M139 on this side, just because I want to match the opacity here. But look how desaturated it is. Oh, it's so beautiful. There are very saturated brown shades, right? Something that's going to be a lot more pure in its brownness, but the fact that you're talking about something that's beige, beige pretty much means that it has gray in it. So now we have like a look, right? I'm not gonna say it's my best look, but it's because I'm doing so many visual demonstrations. I think that I probably still would go for a low-key translucent lip on this side, but I'm gonna do it on this side because I think that this super opaque lip would look especially strange over here. Maybe not. Wait a second, let me see. Yeah, it works better over here. It's worth a try. So we're gonna go with Bikini from Victoria Beckham on this side, which is virtually the same color. It's just very translucent because it is a gloss. See? It's a little warmer too, but it'll be fine. On my lips, it'll be fine. So this is a very worthwhile comparison because like I said, my lips are so translucent. So if you wear something translucent, it's going to cooperate or sometimes clash, but either way mix with what you can see through it. But something opaque is not. It's going to react to what's next to it. Whoa, I know. I'll say that again. If something, lip product, anything, is see-through, translucent, it's going to be strongly affected by how it mixes with the color that it's over, right? Because you're talking about two colors essentially like laying one over the other. So even though this has a little bit more yellow in it, because you can see my lips through it and my lips are so darn blue, because you can see my blood vessels through it, it evens out to this really nice beige, whereas this, I don't need to worry about what it's gonna do on top of my lip color because it's so opaque that it covers my lips up. But when something's really opaque, that's when what's next to it becomes the focal point. And that's why sometimes people get confused about opposing colors, because if you cross them over each other, they will look beige. If you cross yellow and purple, orange and blue, red and green, they're going to end up making kind of a muddy beige. Whereas if you put them next to each other, they'll make something pop because they oppose one another like magnets that have their poles against each other, right? Like the Westman Atelier blushes that bully each other off my desk. So in this case, and we will demonstrate it more in the red lip video, in this case, it is about really nailing the saturation value of this color because it's going to be such a pure pigment. It needs to agree with my skin tone, okay? And with the gloss, I can get away with a little bit more because A, there's just less pigment to it altogether, but B, by virtue of that fact, you're gonna see more of my natural lips through it, which is gonna make it look more native to my skin tone by virtue of the fact that more of my skin tone is showing through. My lips go with my face, there's less covering them, it's gonna look more native to my face. So this was our low opacity, low saturation with the exception of the blush side. This is our high opacity, high saturation with the exception of the blush, which we swapped on this side. And I honestly think that they both work, especially for me trying to wear blue eyeshadow. Okay. I mean, you saw me struggle. and I cut out a lot of the struggle. But as a color that is not quote unquote super easy and intuitive for me to wear because it's not skin native, I don't really know if blue is super skin native to anyone, this visual demonstration is really helpful in showing that it's not necessarily about whether or not you can wear a color. It's about finding the right saturation value of it to work with what you're trying to achieve. So it's like, could you wear royal blue? Yes, but you can use what you learned about saturation to tweak it one way or the other to make it work with the rest of the makeup that you want to wear on your face. So adding white, adding black, adding gray is going to help you manipulate any color to make it work better on you based on the natural saturation of your own skin tone, but also just what you want to look like and what looks good to your eye. It's about being able to look at something and understand why it's not doing what you expected it to do. It's not about right and wrong. It's about knowing what you're looking at. So hopefully this demonstration was helpful for y'all to venture out into makeup and into colors and into opacities and finishes that you might have always seen as off limits for you, because there's a lot of content out there that's trying to tell you what you can and can't do based on diagnostics of your skin tone. But I'm here to tell you, makeup artists are not living in a world of limitations based on someone's skin tone and you not being able to do the look on them that you want to do. It's about finding the version of the color that looks best in what you're trying to achieve by using the fundamentals of opacity and saturation to your advantage. So if y'all found this helpful, please do give the video a thumbs up, subscribe if you have not already, and again, I will link below and probably somewhere at the end the video on how to find your ideal red lip, but it's going to work on any color that you want. So definitely check that out after this. I love y'all so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for loving this series because I have gotten so much positive feedback on it. And yes, I will put the video up here. I love y'all very, very much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.